Thanks, Trevor. Oh, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Ivan Clark. I'm the placemaking team manager at Nature Scott. I hope you've enjoyed the program so far this week, if you've managed to join the other sessions. I didn't manage to make yesterday's session myself, but it focused on the work that Architecture and Design Scotland have done on carbon conscious places. Heard from SEPA about circular economy, and also from Ian Gilzine, Chief Architect. He did a piece on 20-minute neighbourhoods, which is a key commitment in the programme for government. So really, this is just a reminder that if you missed yesterday, like I did, all the sessions are being recorded, and so you'll receive links to those recordings in due course, so you can catch up on sessions you've missed, or indeed you can watch a session again if you're so inclined. Part of my role in Nature Scott is to help embed the use of nature-based solutions in our towns and cities, and I'll be chairing this next session, which is all about using nature-based solutions to help make places more resilient to climate change. We've got some fantastic presentations today from 3 projects that benefited from the Social Housing and Green Infrastructure Fund, and this was just a very small fund established by Nature Scott and Scottish Government to help support better planning for blue-green infrastructure in new and existing social housing. All 3 of the projects are great examples of designing places that are resilient to climate change, but at the same time provide opportunities for people to enjoy nature with benefits to their health and well-being. So we're going to start with, and I'd like to provide a welcome to Mike McCarthy from Collective Architecture. He's going to talk about the work they've done looking at blue-green roofs at a site in Meadowbank in Edinburgh. And then we've got Sheena Rayburn from Rayburn Farquhar Bowen Landscape Architects. She's going to share some design work they've done at a site at Cardonald in Glasgow. And then Rolf Rocha from Ertz Landscape Architects is going to present some really terrific master planning and visioning work they're doing at a site in North Maryhill, Glasgow. And then there'll be a panel session and a Q&A session at the end of 3 presentations, but you can ask questions anytime using the question button on your screen. So just for a quick introduction, I'm now going to share my screen in theory. Okay. Well, hopefully you can see that. So yeah, for those of you who might not have heard of Nature Scott, we're Scotland's nature agency and formerly known as Scottish Natural Heritage, and at some point I'll stop saying formerly known as. But our mission is for Scotland's future to be nature rich, and that includes our towns and cities, because after all, that's where 83% of Scotland's people live. And this isn't just nature for its own sake, but because we know that nature can provide solutions to a range of social and environmental challenges. And one of the key challenges in Scotland is how we manage the extreme rainfall events that are likely to become more frequent as a result of climate change. And sorry for the quality of this slide, but this was taken from my office that I used to work in before lockdown, which is Sylvan House near opposite Edinburgh Zoo. And this was a flash flood from last year. The office is surrounded by, well, mostly impermeable surfaces, and there's also a big flat roof on the top as well. And the water from that goes straight into the sewer, and basically the sewer reached capacity, and everyone had to dash out and rescue their cars. And every year we're seeing more of these types of flood events across Scotland. So what do climate resilient places look like in practice? Well, a bit like this. This is Portland's East Village near the Olympic Village in London. And this is a very dense area of housing, but they're making use of every bit of space to deliver a range of functions and benefits. So most of these roofs you'll see are vegetated, blue-green roofs, and the purpose of those is to slow down the flow of water right at the source. And in extreme rainfall events, the water from the roofs instead of going directly into the sewer, it's conveyed to a series of what are effectively wildlife ponds. So when I was there last year, this pond here was absolutely alive with damselflies, and apparently there are around 150 different plant species around the ponds, and birds and bats as well. And this is what's happening on the other side of that pond. Kids are playing in nature. So this really small space is delivering for water management, for wildlife, and for well-being. And I guess if you can just think of those three W's, water, wildlife, and well-being, in the work that you do, you'll be well on your way to delivering not just climate resilient places, but nature-rich, healthy places for kids to grow up in. But enough from me. Let's now hear from, I guess, the experts on designing climate resilient places in Scotland. So firstly, I'll hand over to Mike McCarthy from Collective Architecture. Thank you, Mike. I think you're on mute, Mike.
Apologies. Sorry, everyone. Hopefully you can see my presentation now. Thanks, Simon. As Ivan said, I'm an architect at Collective Architecture. We've got practice in Edinburgh, one in Glasgow, and we've also got, aside from architecture, we've also recently launched Collective Energy, sort of looking at passive house and energy solutions. So that, that's an interesting development. I'm here today to talk about, just bear with me a second, hopefully the slide's moving on, but basically a quick caveat before I begin. I'm not a green roof expert, but hopefully I can share some useful insights today. This is based on a recent high-level study we carried out looking at how green roof infrastructure could be incorporated into the Meadowbank housing development. I'll attempt to condense a 100-page technical report into 10 minutes today. So I'll sort of dumb some things down, and so apologise if some things are a little bit basic. But if you would like to access the full report, please look at Nature Scott's website in detail. So Collective Architecture and the design team were commissioned by Nature Scott and the Scottish Government to carry out this study in collaboration with the City of Edinburgh Council. Alongside our design team, Rayburn Farquhar-Bowen, Wilred Davidson, David Adamson, we had specialist input from Dusty Gedge of Green Infrastructure Consultancy. To give you a quick overview of the Meadowbank development, Collective Architecture have been working on this with the Edinburgh City Council for 2 years now, since early 2018, to develop a mixed-use but residential-led master plan. The site is located on the former Meadowbank Stadium site to the east of the city. The council wanted to consolidate the land using the land around the new sports centre for mixed-use development. The sports centre itself is by another architect, Holmes Miller, but Collective led the housing scheme. There are 596 units of mixed tenure with a minimum of 25% affordable housing proposed. And the project is currently in master plan stage and has just received planning approval. So this is the approved master plan. You can see the proposed housing surrounding the new sports facilities, a variety of housing types ranging from 2 to 7 stories across the site. So roof types aren't actually specified in the planning application at the moment. No green roofs were considered as part of the scheme before the study. The proposal instead adopts an integrated SUDS approach using swales and rain gardens to treat water runoff. The council will, however, consider how green roofs could be incorporated at the next stage, taking into account the findings of this study. Excuse me. So the question we were asked to explore was, are green roofs viable in Scotland? Using the Meadowbank project as a case study. And the key aim was to demonstrate the business case for green roof infrastructure. Interestingly, unlike large parts of Europe, there are no mandatory policies or incentive schemes at a national level in the UK when it comes to green roofs. London has successfully embedded requirements for green roofs through the planning process and local development plans, with significant increase in their adoption. This has placed a weight of expectation on developers and local authorities alike. However, there doesn't seem to be the same expectation or uptake in Scotland yet. So taking a step back, we started to look at the key green roof types. There are three main types: extensive, semi-intensive, and intensive. I'm not going to elaborate on these today, but instead I want to touch on three variants that were more relevant to the Meadowbank scheme. And the first is the extensive wildflower biodiverse roof. This is creating small topographical variations in the substrate to create a variety of habitats, from wildflower meadows, dry riverbeds, pools, and boulder areas. And this is the type of green roof that our specialist Dusty Gedge advocates over a more conventional extensive roof. The cost uplift between the two is minimal, but the ecological benefits are significant. The next type is solar green and biosolar. This combines a typical PV array with a green roof. Condensation builds on the underside of the panels and can be used as runoff to maintain the vegetation below, creating unique habitats. And the third is the blue roof, as Ivan has already touched on. In terms of water storage capacity, this is a much more engineered solution using geotech products to create a drainage layer and a void space, which together controls the flow of water to gradually drain to a specified runoff rate. And unlike the other forms of SUDs, blue roofs can really help to free up developable area at ground level, reducing the need for below ground drainage requirements such as attenuation tanks, which is particularly relevant for the Meadowbank site. And we took a place-based approach to assigning the roofs, assigning an appropriate roof type to each building. And this took into account how the different roof types can be used to create a variety of spaces, from formal to informal, public and private. Each roof type can create different uses and applications, such as creating opportunities for habitats, play, food growing, and enhancing health and well-being. And we allocated these types to appropriate zones across the three sites, A, B, and C. Now, just to give you a brief overview, Site A has 5 apartment blocks varying between 4 to 6 stories, bounded by a line of mature trees. None of the roofs were accessible, and the planning proposal includes large attenuation tanks below these buildings at ground level. So this part of the site offers opportunities for extensive biodiverse blue roofs to increase water attenuation capacity at roof level and enhance connections to biodiversity. The use of the blue roofs and rain gardens at ground level would hopefully remove the need for these large storage tanks altogether, as demonstrated in this image. Site B has the largest footprint on the site and a variety of slightly lower buildings. Biodiverse roofs could be used to provide visual amenity where they're overlooked, and we imagine that external bin and bike stores at ground level could have biodiverse roofs to maximize urban greening. And finally, Site C has the highest density of the site. This has the opportunity for publicly accessible podium decks and gardens at ground level, raised podium decks with both semi and intensive roofs for resident access, and biosolar and biodiverse roofs at roof level to enhance biodiversity and energy performance. There's also potential for a GP surgery on this part of the site, which would create a really nice connection between the green roofs and horticultural therapy and learning. There's also opportunities to create unique habitats to support a local and endangered species of butterfly, which is found in the adjacent park. So we calculated the impact of the attenuation volume, comparing the green roof strategy to a traditional roof approach, which uses below ground tanks rather than SUDs. In total, with the green roof infrastructure, there's a 37.8% reduction in the attenuation volumes and tank sizes. This was calculated based on a green roof runoff rate, based on a 200-year storm event, plus 40% climate change allowance. And this is particularly relevant on brownfield sites where green roofs can reduce the risks associated with underground pipework and contaminated land. And at a very high level, we compared the green roof strategy to a single SUDS pond approach. What if we consolidated the attenuation volume in one place? What would the impact be? Based on the average site density of 110 homes per hectare, we calculated that the pond would take up an area of equivalent to 40 homes. So in effect, the green roof helps to release developable area on the site. In terms of structural implications, very briefly, the headline is that green roofs add about 2 to 3 stories of dead load onto a building. So this limits how cost effective this is and may impact on the form of construction. Finally, on to costs. The costs show that, of course, adding green roofs is more expensive, but not as much as you may think. On a scheme like this, the roofing costs would increase by approximately £210,000, an uplift of about 6% compared to the planning scheme. However, as a percentage of the overall construction value, the increase isn't very significant, less than 1/4%. So if you take the total increase and split this between all of the proposed dwellings, this would equal about £350 per dwelling, which is not a lot when broken down that way. We also reviewed the life cycle costs, taking into account maintenance. The net present value was positive, and the payback period is estimated to be between 6 to 20 years. And it's important to remember that value is not just financial, there are wider benefits. And these benefits are summarised here: health and well-being, community opportunities, urban cooling, and wildlife. And it's difficult to put a price on these. Moving on to climate change, the impact of green roofs on this issue. In the UK, buildings are responsible for 44% of CO2 emissions. 26% of this comes from housing alone. So how can green roofs help this? It's all fairly obvious stuff, really. Cooling buildings is the main one. Green roofs help to also cool the air. Increasing greenery leads to improved air quality. Reduction of heat island effects, and as we've kind of touched on, stormwater management is a big one too, and I even mentioned that earlier. So all in all, are green roofs viable in Scotland? We think they are, and the key points are recapped on this slide. Minimal uplift to the percentage of construction value. Net present value is positive. The payback period is between 6 and 20 years, project permitting. Below ground infrastructure cost savings, and many wider benefits: social, ecological, environmental, climate change issues, and also health and well-being. So thank you for listening today, and please do visit Nature Scott's website for the full report if you are interested. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thanks a lot, Mike. Yeah, and thanks for giving out that reference, because actually, as well as just the information about the site itself, that report is almost like a manual as well in terms of the different types of green roofs available. So yeah, and encourage people to look at that. Struck actually by some of the images in that, really quite similar to some of the images from the carbon conscious places work that ADS were talking about yesterday. So there's some co-evolution, I think, going on in terms of some of the thinking there. And the other good point about Meadowbank is it's very near the Scottish Parliament. So if we do get green roofs there, we can drag some MSPs along to take a look at them. So that's great. So hopefully Sheena's now available for her presentation. So she's going to talk about a project in Caldonald in Glasgow, and this project might actually already have spades in the ground, but and if not, it's certainly a shovel-ready project anyway, and ready to go. So it's actually a project we should be able to go out and see well when things improve, let's just say. So I think Sheena's just trying to share her screen. Let me know if I need to do anything, guys, will you? I'll stop sharing my webcam. That's probably might help.
Thanks, Ivan. Yes, good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to speak at today's Partners in Planning conference. My name is Sheena Rayburn, and I'm a landscape architect and director of Rayburn Farquhar Bowen. Today I'm going to talk about a really exciting collaboration between Southside Housing Association and Glasgow City Council, who are working together in partnership to enhance residents' gardens and deliver climate resilience in the wider area. SWECO and Rayburn Farquhar Bowen were appointed to provide a retrofit green infrastructure landscape design that improved the environment for residents who live at Queensland Court and Queensland Gardens, which are these two 19-storey blocks of flats that you can see on the screen. But these improvements will also reduce the flood risk for residents in the Cardonald and Hillington neighbourhoods. This is part of a wider strategy to make the city more resilient to the impacts of climate change in the future. So the site is located on the west of Glasgow, just below the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital. It's quite an interesting site in that it's bound by the railway and the M8 to the north, and Cardonald railway station is just to the east, and it's surrounded by existing low density housing. So Southside Housing Association wanted us to look at the grounds around these two multi-storey tower blocks. You can see it's quite a generous setting, and you know, the vegetation and mature trees along Queensland Drive are quite attractive, but and the gardens and grounds have been well maintained by the Housing Association. But there were a few issues, and there were a few opportunities to actually get much more out of this landscape than it currently offers. So at the moment, the parking provision on the Cumbria block, which is the block on the left, is quite insufficient, whereas there's an over provision of parking space and roads for the Butte block, which is on the right. Aside from the trees fronting the street, there really was a lot of hard standing and a lot of grass areas with no obvious function or use. And there was a small games court just to the back, and that was the only element of play provision. So the client at Southside was very keen to see what we could do to improve this. From Glasgow City Council's perspective, you know, they're facing a large part of the city really being exposed to climate change and risk of flooding of residential properties, and the associated costs and impact of that for damage to properties. And there was also a recognition that the traditional drainage system in the city was really almost at capacity, and so they prepared a surface water management plan for different areas in the city, including Hillington and Cardonald, and they really wanted to see measures that could be helping the surface water runoff by slowing it and storing it for short periods of time within the landscape, so mimicking nature as much as possible to be a natural sponge. And Queensland Gardens was identified as an opportunity where we could look at how we could implement flood resilience and climate change resilience within these grounds. There are a few common misconceptions about surface water drainage features, that these are just ponds with deep water, or they take up a large amount of space, or they can't be next to play areas, or they need a lot of maintenance, and that's really not the case. You know, we can integrate right from the beginning and retrofit, actually, in the case of Queensland Court and Queensland Gardens, the spaces around houses to be these multifunctional spaces that, yes, they filter and they slow down the rainwater, but they can also be really attractive garden spaces. They can be spaces for people to enjoy and look onto, but they can also be spaces that improve biodiversity and ecology of a city, and act as spaces and habitats for pollinator species, which is really important. The image at the top is actually a scheme that we designed and delivered for Bertha Park in Perth, and this was a new housing development. It's going to be 3,000 homes eventually, and right from the beginning we've integrated surface water management right at the heart of the development. And you can see in the background there's also play right next to the housing, so these things can all function together. The Housing Association saw a real opportunity to partner up with the City Council, and you know, they saw that they had the space to help with reducing the flood risk to a wider neighbourhood, but also that there was scope for that to be seen as educational opportunities or improved outdoor spaces for play, but also for community socialising and improved well-being, and they could pool their resources and costs together to get both of these outcomes. And part of the consultation that we did in the grounds with local people and local residents, people told us that actually there's a lot of space around these buildings, but very little that they can do in them. And there wasn't much for kids to do, but there was also a larger older population that had lived in these flats for a long period of time, and they were really keen to have somewhere they could look onto and to go and socialise and meet up. So that really started to inform our brief in a way, and inform how we set out the design and the master plan for the space. So we were able to give more parking spaces to the block on the left that needed it, but we were able to reduce the road and hard standing and consolidate the parking for the block, the flats on the right, and that freed up quite a lot of space for other things. So as is the case, often existing housing areas have an abundance of hard standing areas that they don't actually need or use. So we could incorporate the rainwater management features such as these linear swales that take the runoff from the roof and from the hard standing areas and start to slow down the water and treat it, filtering into the rainwater basin, and then at a controlled level allowing that water to go through into the drainage system at a rate that the city's infrastructure can cope with. But there was also real scope here for edible spaces, for a community garden, for play, and that's at all levels, at toddler level and more challenging play for older children. So the master plan here shows the arrangement and the layout, and actually we were able to really maximise what we could do with the space. And the excavations for the drainage features resulted in an opportunity for us to actually use that material on what is a fairly flat site for maximum interest in the play area. So we've got these mounds and we've got these little topographic features that you can build bridges between, you can have play slides form, and you keep that material on site. So again, in terms of sustainability, it's an efficient way to use that material. There's also a sort of community garden that's between the two blocks of flats that we saw as a way of being a space for both sets of residents, and then an existing garden area that faced onto Queensland Drive, where actually, although that was fenced off on the roadside, we could just extend some fencing and hedging there, and that became a safe space for toddlers and smaller children to play in within the grounds there. One thing that we had the input of 10,000 Rain Gardens for Scotland, who were really great at involving people in the community consultations, and one thing that they were keen to do was to have some sort of feature that showed rainwater in the landscape. And we had a young person at the community event who created this lovely clay piece on the left-hand side, which mimics a sort of flow of water. And that really inspired us to develop a feature piece that brought the rainwater from the roof down through the building and back out into the landscape. And you can see the water flowing through this garden area. And this kind of ribbons of water channels that will then link into the swales and the rainwater basin. And that became a centrepiece and a focal point for this whole garden area. This is a little sketch view of the toddler play area. So we're keeping a lot of the existing trees here and just creating a route through and a play deck and a willow tunnel and some picnic benches to really provide that setting for these smaller children. And we decided to keep the games area because it is something that is well used and it allows kids to throw a ball about and be active, but also there was scope for more natural play integrated with planting and trees and mounding that we think kind of works well as a contrast. The landscape maintenance is something that had to be considered. You know, Southside Housing Association look after the grounds really well as they are. You know, the maintenance regime will change slightly as a result of these new proposals. However, I think it's worth emphasising and stressing that the maintenance of the rainwater features are really part of the landscape maintenance. You're looking after landscape as much as anything, and you might be clearing out filters now and again, but really it's part of the landscape, so it's no more onerous than it would be for maintaining any other gardens and grounds. And it's worth emphasising that, you know, this is being made possible by a number of funding sources and pulling together different grant bodies to actually deliver this. And a big part of that was the Green Infrastructure Fund from NatureScot. And you know, Scottish Government. And I think where the project is now, which is the detailed design has been done and the project is out to tender with construction due to start early in the new year, it's a really exciting prospect that the gardens around these blocks of flats are really going to be enhanced greatly for the residents, but they're also going to contribute to the wider strategy for climate resilience in this part of the city. So it's a very exciting project to be part of, and thank you for your time, and I'll hand over.
Hey, I'm unmuted now. That's good. Thanks, Sheena. That's great. Yeah, I'm really looking forward. I mean, you might have seen me there handing that massive check over, and that was a really fun day. Something I've always wanted to do. So I'm really looking forward as well to actually seeing the shovels go in the ground, as it were, and see the final results. I mean, I think that's a really good example of a kind of a small project, well, relatively small, but actually it adds up along with lots of other stuff Glasgow Council are doing to actually a big strategic response that Glasgow Council are making in terms of the climate emergency. So yeah, can't wait to see the results of that. So last but not least, I'd like to welcome John Rocha, and certainly not least in terms of the scale of the ambition of the work that he's doing in North Maryhill, Glasgow. So I'll hand over to Rolf now, which I think involves me stopping sharing my webcam.
Hi there. Hopefully everybody can see the presentation and hear me, and hear the phone message that's being delivered in the background as well. In terms of my presentation, as Ivan introduced at the beginning, I'll talk about the North Maryhill project in due course, but we'll start slightly broader and touch on a few examples of other work that we've been involved with on the way. Really starting with this very broad observation, the world's made up of, there we go, interconnected systems. And really, in terms of thinking about integrated green infrastructure, I think it's quite useful to relate to thinking about the human body and the series of interconnected and parallel systems that are within us all. And in many ways, I think it can be a useful metaphor for thinking about the built environment. So making that comparison relationship of these different systems to habitat networks, access networks, green and open space, water management, roads and transport, and built development. And I think it's fair to say that certainly historically, decision-making in the built environment has tended to be dominated by a couple of these, thinking about a couple of these, with the others being relatively incidental. This project example is one we worked on about 10 years ago, and this was for Glasgow City Council and the Glasgow and Clyde Valley Green Network Partnership, looking, it was focused on Nitz Hill and looking at basically the southwest extent of the urban area of Glasgow. I'll touch on this and a few others, really to give a sense of our strategy and master plan, that they're all informed through this same layered analysis of the different systems, looking at built form, transport, green infrastructure, water management, and so on. And these strategies identify opportunities to basically realize the maximum positive impact, delivering multiple benefits so that the landscape and the public realm is delivering a range of functions. And to sort of draw that out, this is a sort of promotional graphic that we helped Glasgow Clyde Valley Green Network develop to highlight that sort of layered approach and this multifunctional green infrastructure approach, and to link that also to policy. On a similar basis and a sort of the same sort of large strategic scale, this was a piece of work again for Glasgow City Council that was essentially looking at the whole area of Greater Easterhouse in the northeast of Glasgow. The same layered analysis of looking at the different systems, and this diagram's looking at what came out of that in very broad terms, looking at active travel, the green network links, and also in terms of surface water management. But from that then, in key areas of anticipated change, looking at those in more detail at a sort of master plan level, and looking at green infrastructure as an enabler to anticipated development. Similarly, we've been working on a number of hospital campuses. This example is the Forester Hill Hospital campus in Aberdeen, and I think the reality with hospital campuses, particularly since the mid-20th century, is that they've tended, by necessity, they've grown incrementally and in a, not to say unplanned, but this having to respond to immediate needs and opportunities, and evolve into these environments that arguably don't use the available space very well. The routes around them aren't legible, and it can be a very confusing environment for people visiting the hospital. And so we developed for NHS Grampian a campus-wide landscape and public realm strategy that's looking at creating usable spaces, legible routes, helps to enable future development, and incorporates, importantly, surface water management. Again, really focused on multifunctional green spaces. And another project that is hopefully shortly to start on site in the new year. This is the phase 1 green infrastructure project there at Forester Hill, which is incorporating surface water storage features into public landscape, designed so that it is safe and it's something that people can positively interact with. And in a similar, through a similar process, the work that we're currently doing for Mary Hill Housing Association and their various partners, including Nature Scotland, developing a green infrastructure master plan for a new neighbourhood in North Mary Hill. The existing situation on this site is of a series of residential towers that are sitting in the context of cleared housing land and derelict green space. The site sits on the north side of a pretty large hill, so there are steep slopes which dominate parts of the site. The site's broadly surrounded by wider citywide active travel routes and connections, but it's actually disconnected from them more locally. And we work through the same process of this sort of layered analysis, looking at all of these different systems, and that process and the findings of that really underpin the development of the master plan. And just to sort of unpack that a little bit, a sort of diagrammatic version of the master plan here. the new neighbourhood, which is focused around a series of community neighbourhood green spaces that are connected into the wider green network and also form a strategic habitat link essentially from the green belt into the city and connecting to the River Kelvin, I guess, ultimately. The strategy incorporates, the master plan incorporates surface water elements in this landscape spine. You can see these as a sort of linear blue elements through here that are tied in with the green network and the active travel routes. And what these do in part, given that this is on a large north-facing slope, so in terms of surface water running down into the sort of flatter, lower lying areas of the site, which are really the more developable bits, we're essentially capturing that water before it gets into the lower parts of the site and managing that and dealing with that. And essentially what it's doing is releasing those lower, flatter parts of the site for development. And this, with these various links, it ties the new neighbourhood into the wider active travel network, to local public transport links, to the local shopping streets and the community facilities in that area. There are a few images here just to give a sense of an overview of that, and you can see in the sort of background of this view where some of the steeper slopes are, there's existing woodland and the enhancement and management of that. You can see the connecting active travel routes and associated water management elements within that. And then through the core of the new neighbourhood, more towards the foreground of the view, really through that, a spine of community green space incorporating a whole range of facilities for the residents. And again, another view here, which focusing more on that spine through the core of the neighbourhood and the spaces there for the new community. And another view in the upper part of the proposed master plan, which shows the, in this instance, the sort of, in this zone, a larger scaled water management feature that's capturing water partway on this slope and dealing with that. And lastly, really just to briefly touch on another project, which here it is in its completed form. He jokes. This is a project we designed and oversaw delivery of a few years ago for West of Scotland Housing Association, and it was then the outcome of, or one of the outcomes of, a piece of work, 2014 multifunctional green space project for Glasgow City Council, essentially a green infrastructure study. And here, this was a former a cleared site, derelict site that was contaminated, sitting at the core of the neighbourhood in Camlachie, Barrowfield. And on a pretty tight budget, we delivered a new 1 hectare community park, which incorporated surface water management features. And there's a picture of it in its completed state. So apart from the drawings, it's obviously great that these projects become delivered. So I think that's me, and I'll hand back, if I can figure out how to do that, to Ivan. There you go.
At which point someone's phone goes off. That's great.
Yep.
Thanks, Rolf. That's great. I mean, I really like that kind of metaphor at the beginning about, you know, the human body and the need to integrate all the systems, or it doesn't work, and the need to integrate the systems in a place to make them successful. I mean, I think all three presenters, you know, demonstrate the crucial role of design in bringing all these elements together. And I think today's been a real showcase, actually, for the landscape profession. So I'd just like to thank all the speakers for sharing their work. I hope you've been firing questions in. The speakers are going to hang around for another 10 minutes or so. But at this point, I'll hand back to Trevor to see if we've got any any questions for the team and for me, if you like.
Thanks. We've got quite a few questions in already. If you do want to ask anything, please just submit it in the box and note who you'd like me to ask, or just direct it to all. The first one was first directed towards Mike, but I think it could be applicable to all the presenters we've had today. It was asking about how would this project scale up across Scotland, and how would you begin to influence volume house builders to take on board green roofing projects or any of the other projects mentioned. Oh, Mike, I think you're still on mute. Bear with us a second until we can get Mike back in the room. There we go. I think that's it. Okay. Apologies for this. Could I pass it on to one of the other presenters, Rolf or Sheena, if you'd like to come in just now while we sort Mike's technical difficulty out?
Yes,
Sure.
I'm happy to jump in. Yeah, I think part of the sort of reason behind the study was to try and show both social housing providers and the private market that this was scalable, that it is scalable, and that there are many benefits to it. And you know, I think it's something that perhaps has taken off more in the south of England, perhaps, where land is so much more a premium and density of development is much higher. And I think, you know, a lot of developers have had to go, you know, up into the roof areas to maximise the developable area. And I think that's somewhere that certainly in our cities where we're starting to feel that pressure much more now, it does offer a real sort of viable option to do that. And we can see cost-wise, there's not that much of an uplift, but I think in terms of, you know, when we think about air pollution, which is a major cause of death in cities, we think about biodiversity and climate resilience and cooling of buildings and cooling of our cities as you know, climate change has that influence. I think there has to be, you know, a recognition that this is something that could really help with all of these things, and it is being done, you know, more widely in Europe, I would say, than perhaps here, but I think it will come.
Can I just add to that? Sorry, my audio was stuck on mute. I'm not sure what happened there, but I think, as you've said, Sheena, I think in Europe there are a lot of incentive schemes. There's a lot of grants. There's even mandatory policies, and obviously London has sort of since 2010, I believe, has sort of successfully kind of embedded some of these kind of policies within planning policy rather than making it mandatory. But it would be interesting to see in Scotland if some of that could be encouraged and embedded in our local development plans and wider national planning policies, because London obviously has maybe a greater financial power and on a global scale, and green roofs are often adopted by private developers. So I guess it's kind of, how do you then take that into, say, local authority housing? But if it came from planning policy direct, that would be one way of making it a nationally adoptable rather than something that's a bit of a bolt-on, perhaps, at the moment.
Maybe I'll just one extra point on that about embedding it is that one of the things we found was that it certainly green-blue roofs where you're storing water in voids on a roof, that's not sort of viable for small, your average semi, if you like. But when we're talking about denser housing, sort of 3 stories and above, it becomes viable because it's to do with the weight that the walls can take. And so it will be appropriate for all situations. But I guess, I suppose going forward, we want more compact cities, higher density cities in any case. So it's the right solution for that kind of future in any case.
And Rolf, do you want to come in with anything else that might not have been covered?
No, I'll leave that one there. I think those guys covered that one pretty well.
Okay, thank you. The second question was directed for Sheena. Someone's asking, could the same landscape-driven approach be applied to retrofit city centres for flood alleviation?
Yes, absolutely. We're working with University of Strathclyde at the moment on the redevelopment of what was Rotten Row Gardens and the surrounding streets. And if anyone knows that part of Glasgow, the whole gardens are set within a sort of 1 in 8 slope, super steep. And at the moment, when it rains, the rainwater just sheets down the street, down onto George Street. So the university are very keen to bring these streets back into their control and actually make these a series of terraced rain gardens and pollinator friendly planting and reducing the amount of hard standing and making it much more of a comfortable space for people walking and cycling. So that, yes, absolutely, this is happening, I would say more and more now, and we're looking at a large scale landscape retrofit, in fact, of the area of Glasgow and Woodside with Queen's Cross Housing Association, and that has a real mix of different types of housing, from tenements to multi-storey flats and so on. And there's a huge amount of hard standing that isn't doing anything or providing any real functional benefit to these residents. And so we're looking at integrating play and rainwater management in the landscape there, as well as providing, I suppose, a softer, a greener environment. It's quite a harsh environment. It's very built up and it's right next to the motorway. So I think there's lots of scope for that in our cities. There's just so much, when you start to look at it, there's so much space that could be given back over to people to use rather than for, when it was designed in the 60s for the car and maximum, parking spaces and so on, and roadways. And a lot of that space isn't actually needed. So I think that a lot can be taken back into flexible use for edible spaces for wildlife and for people.
Okay, thank you, Sheena. The next question, I'll try and ask a question for each of the presenters while we have time. Rolf, with your project, someone's asking, at what point did you consult with the local communities, and how was the feedback loop on that?
Well, I think it probably, between the different ones that I've shown, it varied, and some of the higher level strategy stuff is a kind of and the initial analysis. What I'd say is it sort of creates a platform then to basically enable a dialogue between residents and the various stakeholders and the agencies. So it's kind of, some of it is there's sort of almost advanced work that feeds in and supports that process. The hospital sites, there's the dialogue with the hospital community and people around. At North Mary Hill, in the development of the strategy, there was earlier stages, there were workshops and sessions with existing residents, and essentially then there'll be subsequent phases of dialogue going forward, because obviously these projects going from kind of strategy and master plan through to delivery, it's quite a long process. And so at each stage, there are stages of dialogue and input and feedback. So, it's sort of, built into each of those processes.
Yeah, just to come in there, they used the place standard, didn't they, Rolf, in terms
Yeah.
of some of that initial community consultation as well. But I mean, the great thing about your work is that it's sort of, I think it's really inspiring to see and to, I guess, to sort of show, that kind of imagination and inspire people as to what a place could look like. So it's really, really good, going forward to, we'll need to engage with community, but I hope they will find it quite inspiring.
Okay, the next question is probably directed to all of you. Can retrofitting or landscape remodeling be viable in areas which have marginal land values but significant flooding issues, which are only likely to get worse in climate change? Mike, I'll pass that one to you first.
I think it's always we have to make it more viable, don't we? Sorry, I'm getting some feedback, but I think the more we use integrated approaches, and the more we integrate these into our schemes, then these approaches shouldn't be sort of marginalized alternative approaches. We should start to embed them in all types of schemes. So I guess it's financially difficult to retrofit some of these approaches, but Rolf or Sheena may have more recent experience of how they've integrated those on other projects. But
I mean, just if I maybe refer to a couple of the projects that I touched on, and hopefully this responds to the question, but the North Mary Hill project is a mix of proposed new build and existing housing, and essentially, so it's a mix of new and retrofit, if you like. And I suppose the thing with that is that as a site, without denigrating it too much, I mean, it's a challenging site. There's a lot of derelict space, cleared housing space. It visually, in terms of the character of it, is, it isn't great the way it is. And I suppose the strategy there is that there's, an investment in terms of, if you like, green infrastructure that then changes the whole status of that site. So it solves problems, and in terms of placemaking and the quality of that environment, it creates a new context then for, if you like, in that case with the new build, for investment and development of new housing, meshed in with the existing housing, where associated with this or as part of that plan, obviously Mary Hill Housing Association are looking at improving the physical environment around the existing housing. So, I think that agenda is at the core of that project, really.
Yeah, I would probably just jump in there, and I think I would echo what Rolf's saying. It can be a catalyst to actually release investment, but there's also, I think, a responsibility to invest in existing communities, and it's actually, we don't just kind of, a lot of money goes into capital investment of new housing areas, but a lot of the existing areas and neighbourhoods actually, really need that investment in their public realm and the streets, and to adapt it for the way that things are now, not just in coming out of COVID and climate resilience, but just looking ahead to the future, because a lot of these existing landscapes are really outdated and not fit for today's purpose or function. And so I think there's an efficiency and there's a core sustainability about upgrading and enhancing and making these existing communities prepared for the next 20, 30, 40 years. And I think we've got a responsibility to try and improve and enhance that for people's quality of life, and it drives the whole Scottish Government health agenda and health and well-being, that a lot of these things might seem superficial, but actually, people, if they care about the place they live in and they appreciate it and they enjoy it, and it makes life easier for them to get around and to socialise and to enjoy, it makes a huge difference to people's lives, and I think that's what we have to focus on.
And just to pick up on that as well, because I think where there are agencies who are sort of intervening and doing this kind of work, and I think the last thing I showed in the slideshow at Camlaki Barrowfield, where there was a hectare of contaminated derelict land in the core of a community that had been there for a whole long time, and fantastically West of Scotland housing and partners which included what's now Nature Scotland and Forestry Commission and others put money in to turn that space around. And I mean, just something that was a real blight becomes a usable space, and again, it's incorporating surface water management, so it's an immediate community benefit and solving if you like a broader, longer term.
Thank you all. Apologies, we are running out of time now, and I will have to make that the last question. Thanks for everyone who did manage to send a question in today. We will send these on to all of the panelists, and they may pick that up with you in future. As well as that, we will be, with this session has been recorded, and we will be sending out an email to all delegates with a recording and a copy of all the slides. I've just put in the chat a link to tomorrow's set of webinars, and when you log out for today, you will get a few quick questions to fill in just on your sign out just about today's webinar, and I'll just pass back to Ivan. Close off for today.
Great, thanks, Trevor. Yeah, I mean, just remains for me to thank all the contributors today. Some fantastic presentations. So I hope to see you again at some point in the flesh soon. Thanks, everyone.